here, and that's actually supplied on the DVD, so you can set up the scene again if obviously your directory structure will be different to the one that I'm using here. So point this modifier at that cache file on the DVD, and when it's got that, you can actually now play back exactly the same animation, and it effectively it's frozen that animation down into a sort of file that you can play back. And this is topologically dependent. Again, if you've got, let's say, 150 vertices in this mesh and your cache file has got 130, you're not going to get the right results. In fact, you know, your mesh will probably explode when you try to play it back. So if we press play, you can see it plays back very quickly. And the beauty of this system is that now, you know, this mesh doesn't have any rig. We can grab it, we can move it around. We haven't got any sort of worries about, you know, the rig causing any sort of problems. We can rotate it, whatever. You know, it's just a very fast, simple object. It's just a mesh with a modifier on it, and that modifier just brings in the cached vertex positions on each frame, and applies those to the vertices, and gives you this animation result, which you can see here. And the cool thing about this, obviously, is that you can, you know, go in and change the cache values using MaxScript and so on. So it's actually a pretty cool tool to use in a large sort of animation pipeline. Let's move on from here now and have a look at the subdivision surfaces. The sub-D modifiers pretty much only deal with tessellating either an editable mesh or an editable poly. They're used as part of Max's polymodeling suite of tools. And to demonstrate them, I've used our mesh again here. Now, if we have a look at the stack, you can see what's actually going on here. I've got our cylinder from earlier. I've got a point cache on it, and that gives us our animation, which we saw in the previous set of modifiers. It's using the point cache. And then on top of those, I've got an edit poly modifier, and you can see that actually modifies our mesh. And then at the top of the stack, I've got this turbo smooth, and this is one of the two main sub-D modifiers. The other one is mesh smooth. Mesh smooth has a lot more options and is a lot more flexible, but as part of that flexibility, it has a longer programming pipeline, as it were, and that actually means that it's actually a lot slower executing than turbo smooth is. And obviously turbo smooth indicates, you know, by its name that it's a faster version of mesh smooth. And if you don't need all those fancy options that mesh smooth has, just use turbo smooth. You'll end up with a smooth mesh, and it'll actually do that much faster, and that means you'll get interactive playback. So let's just quickly show that here. I'll go down to the sub-D areas, and I'll add mesh smooth on, and we'll turn off ISO display, and we'll have 2 iterations. And up above, I've turned off turbo smooth just for now. That's, you can see that's got 2 iterations as well when it's turned on. And if I press play, you can see we're getting this kind of playback speed, which is okay, but it's not exactly fantastically fast, as you can see, as our mesh object wobbles around. So if I stop that, and I'll turn off mesh smooth and I'll turn on turbo smooth. I'll go up to that in the stack. You can see it gives you exactly the same result in this case. But if I press play, you'll see that you actually get much faster playback speed. And you can see it's actually much closer to interactivity there. So that's pretty cool. Now, as we cover elsewhere in this DVD, it's also possible, obviously, to I'll just get rid of mesh smooth here, to have this only happen at render time if we want to. If I do a quick render of this, you can see there's our mesh. And if I didn't want to have that smoothing going on in the viewport, then I can actually just say turn it off in the viewport, and it'll still be on at the render time. If I press playback, you'll see we get very fast fluid playback using this simple proxy object. And then if we stop it in a certain frame, press play, we get this render here, and as you can see, it's exactly the same result. So in this case, the modifier is only kicking in at render time. I'll just turn that back on. That's it for the subdivision surfaces. Let's move on now and have a look at the FFDs, or the freeform deformations. And again, we've got our mesh. If we have a look at it, you can see we've got a cylinder, then we've got a point cache, which obviously makes our object move around. Then we've got an FFD here, which you can see is actually deforming our mesh our cylinder. And at this point, if I just turn off the, if I actually just press play, you'll see what's actually happening. As the volume of the cylinder changes, you can see the FFD's keeping its gizmo, its bounding box around the actual mesh, and it's continuing to deform that mesh based on these control points. Then above that I've got editable poly, so you can see that's then being applied procedurally. That comes in after the FFD. And then we've got our turbo smooth again, and that applies smoothing at the top of the stack. So if we go back to the beginning, I'll just turn off wireframe display for now, just to make it a little bit faster, and press play. You can see we've got a number of deformations going on here now. We've got these, we've got the point cache bringing in that original animation, then we've got the FFD deforming the mesh, and then we've got editable poly adding onto the geometry, and then at the top of the stack we've then got our turbo smooth actually giving us this smooth geometry at the end of the pipeline. So it's a weird little object, but it gives you an idea of how you can build things up procedurally in 3ds Max. And again, we're sticking with our mesh. If we look at the stack here, you can see I've actually got this point cache turned off in this case. We've got the cylinder, then we've got the point cache giving us some animation. I'll actually just turn off all these modifiers for now, and we'll just build it up so we can get an idea of what each one does. We've got our point cache, so there's our animation. Then we've got editable poly here. As you can see, that gives us our lugs coming out here. Then I've got twist, which twists the mesh. We go up here, we'll see the mesh being twisted. It's actually better at this point if I leave edit poly turned on, because then you can see those lugs being twisted around. And I've actually animated the angle parameter here, so if I scrub through the timeline, you can see that twist modifier is actually twisting those lugs around. That's pretty cool. And then we've got a turbo smooth, which does our usual smoothing. And then at the top of the stack I've got a taper. And in this case I'm not actually tapering the mesh, although obviously I could do that. I could taper down the top. But in this case I've actually got the curve value. And you can see I've actually animated the curve value, so it actually goes from sucking the middle of the mesh in at the beginning to pumping it out at the end. And if we turn on all the other modifiers below it in the stack and we press play, you can see we get this really crazy kind of weird animation here with all the modifiers in the stack working to modify our mesh in different ways. And all of these modifiers basically are working on parameters, and that's why obviously it's in the parametric group. You've got modifiers here like twist, taper, noise. Let's have a look down here. We've got bend, taper, twist, noise, stretch, squeeze, push, relax, ripple, wave, skew, and so on and so forth. And each one of these does some pretty cool things. The noise modifier, for instance, is a very nice modifier and actually allows you to apply a sort of random noise pattern to our objects. So I'll just very quickly show you that. To show this, I'll just turn off taper. We'll leave turbo smooth on. That'll give us a bit more geometry to work with. I'll turn off twist, and we'll turn off the point cache. And if I give some amplitude to each one of these axes, and we make the scale of the noise a bit smaller, you can actually see what it does. It gives you this kind of noisy effect here. You can make it fractal, so it's a little bit, well, it's actually a lot rougher. We'll just move this up here, the scale of it a bit, so it's not quite as granular. And you can turn on animate noise, and if you press play now, you get this really kind of crazy noise effect where the noise is actually passing through the geometry. I can turn off fractal again and get a kind of smoother noise effect. As you can see, it's creating this kind of wavy effect. So it's very, very cool. And as I said, the modifiers in the parametric set are all work in a similar kind of way, and they're very useful for animation and for producing certain effects. Let's move on now and have a look at the surface modifiers. The surface group is pretty much split evenly between modifiers that can be used to define which materials are applied to your object using multi-sub-object materials, and a small set of displacement-based modifiers. I've just done a very basic scene here which shows you how you can use, in this case, it's the material by element modifier. And what I've actually